Welcome to the Retirement Lifestyle Show. I'm your co-host, Roshan Loungani, here with Eric Olson and Adrian Nicholson. I'm really excited about our topic today because it's one that almost everyone, I think, struggles with. We're going to be discussing when to retire, whether you should work longer or leave the work force a little bit sooner. And I think this is one that'll be very helpful for our listeners. As I said, everyone struggles with this. How have you guys been? Adrian, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Roshan. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited about this topic. I'm excited about my new podcast setup. This is my fifth one, and I think this is it. I really like this one. All the other ones, there's always like problems or little distractions here or there or quality, but I'm really happy with this one. Me and my friends always joke around about like, everywhere where we work, different like setups now because people are working from home. So it's fun adjusting it, always having something new. So it's been pretty great.
I love the setup, Adrian. I love the lighting and the whole thing, which is for our listeners important now since we've moved to YouTube as well. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, one of my friends, he does his work in a closet. Another one does it in a laundry room. So everyone's just doing the best they can right now. So I can't really complain.
Well, tell them to get a green screen and they'll be all right, just like I did.
Your green screen's one of the most popular thing right now, Roshan. I've been telling it to people, and everyone wants to get it. You should really be a salesman for a green screen. So it's really solid.
I need to learn how to use it properly and put more pictures back there. It's the same beautiful office setup that I got online the whole time.
Well, that's great. So we've got a good topic today. How are you doing, Roshan?
Everything is great. It's been good over the little cold I had, and back to normal. So happy about that.
Cool. That's cool.
And Eric, how about you? You went house hunting, right?
Yeah. So Friday, we're watching some of these houses. As I've mentioned, listeners who've been following this story know that my wife and I are relocating to somewhere between Holland and Grand Rapids and Michigan. And so we were watching on the online services, the realtor services, these houses that would go up one day and then there'd be a pending offer the next. And we realized, okay, the plan had been on this basis to get out there, rent an apartment for a while and really get to know neighborhoods and what have you. And we just thought, chuck it. Let's just get out there and see if we can find a house today, so we set something up and viewed 5 houses and made an offer on one. So we'll see by tomorrow morning whether or not we're in line to get that.
Yeah, well, good luck. We hope you get it. And I'm going to dive right into our topic now for today, timing your retirement, whether to keep working or to work longer. And Adrian, I'm going to put you on the spot. Why don't we start with what's your top reason that you thought of for people to work longer?
I'll just start with one of the more basic ones. Work longer can help you really achieve most of your financial goals, have more money in retirement, can maybe do all the stuff you want on your bucket list without having to worry about finance. That's one of the more basic ones, the go-to one. You work longer, just generate more income, I think is really one of the thing that pushes people nowadays to really work as long as you can to really build up that saving, because finances can be a really stressful topic for some people and can be a tough part of retirement, unfortunately, sometimes for people. So that's something that's always a big motivating factor for people to really work as long as they can, really try and become as liquid as possible, making sure they really build up their nest egg, I think is a very motivating factor. But again, this really does come down to individuals and how people manages their finance, how their plans are set up. So there are a lot of layers that really go into it, and we'll probably touch on a lot of those today.
Yep. I sort of lumped all financial reasons together, right? And when I was going through my list, that's the number one reason I had for working longer as well. And the reason I lumped financial together is because I almost feel like unless you're willing to make lifestyle changes, you're not at a point where you can make a decision if you have not reached the financial level necessary to retire. So that was my number one as well. Why would I work longer? If you can't afford to retire now, you sort of have to work longer. Eric, how about you?
Well, if we're going to stay with the financial as a starting point for this, I agree with what you've said. We've talked a lot about this in relationship to the question of whether or not you have guaranteed income streams from pensions, and then also the guaranteed income stream from Social Security, to which where you have a certain degree of control over the timing of starting that, anywhere between age 62 and age 70. And as a result, it can be a big difference in how much you'll receive on a monthly basis once you actually do turn that income stream on. But I would also just acknowledge that for those clients that have reason to believe that in their case, they have a relatively shorter life expectancy, and they hate their work, honestly. It's just burning them out. I can see how the appeal of building a bigger nest egg notwithstanding, they're going to be looking at it from the vantage point of, how do I actually get to that stage of not having to be in a job I hate any longer, and now able to enjoy a period of time where in my family that period of time may not have been historically as long as other families typically enjoy. So I see, that the finances is a super powerful motivation, but it sometimes is going to be overridden by those basic considerations.
Yeah, I agree. And let's come back to that, because I have a lot of I'd put that under the category of reasons to leave your work sooner, right? As opposed to staying at work longer. Would you have the top priority in your list if you were deciding to work longer? Would it be financial as well? Would you agree with that?
I would say the most common, I'm not saying it would be the top, but I would say it's the most common motivation for living longer, just for the reasons that you've outlined. Unless you're able and confident that you can make a pretty significant lifestyle adjustment, if you've been living comfortably but didn't save a lot. And, we talk with a lot of people. Most of our clients are people, for reasons that are probably self-evident, that have saved pretty well and then have a good base of assets. But we also recognize that we deal with probably the 10 to 15% of the American population that are the most financially prepared for their retirement. So we have, in that sense, a bit of a skewed view. If we have listeners that may have been, tuning in who aren't as prepared, then some of the other elements of this discussion, particularly the strong financial motivation to work longer, that might be even a more dominant consideration in their cases than is true perhaps for most of our clients.
Well, yeah, and so the reason I lumped all the financial, I used financial as an umbrella category because, and Eric, tell me if I'm missing something, but let's just say if you can't afford to retire right now, and I love extreme examples to get my point across. So you're 60 years old, you live off of $50,000 a year, and you have, let's say $100,000 a year. Makes my extreme example easier to swallow. Sure. You're 60, you live on $100,000 a year, you have no savings, and all you have is Social Security. Right. So you can't retire and maintain your lifestyle. Now, if you decide that you're going to make major lifestyle changes to live within what Social Security provides, to me, that's not an option. Right. Well, not changing your lifestyle. To me, the numbers don't work. If you have nothing saved for retirement, you're 60 and you need $100,000 a year. Let's say you have Social Security that'll pay you $30,000. You can't retire and maintain your lifestyle, so you have to work longer. I agree with that, and I would say, because the other part of being able to living within your means isn't just having more means; it's also having a more compact cost structure, right? So you live on less. But if you haven't been saving, then it suggests that you haven't yet adapted to living on less. And that's the behavioral change of living on significantly less is the most difficult adjustment, I think, for some people. So I think in that case, you would say,
I'm going to ascertain whether I can live on a lot less by making the immediate adjustments in the composition of my spending to get it way down. And I'll use this opportunity while I'm still working to then save aggressively, not expecting necessarily that the savings now at too late a stage in the game is necessarily going to be your salvation. But learning how to live on a lot less might be the key benefit of this period. And there's
Right.
nothing wrong with getting that at extra savings too, because building something up will help.
And to me, I put that in the financial category too, right? Because you're either, what I mean by that is you can't afford the retirement. And if you decide that you're going to cut back on expenses to do that, that's still a financial adjustment. Right. So
Yes.
that's why I put and the reason I lump all financial stuff together is because I feel like that list is almost endless, right? You can talk about the benefits of delaying Social Security. You mentioned cutting back on expenses, moving to lower cost area. But to me, all of those are financial.
Yeah. So you had asked the question whether I thought it was the most important, and I said I think it's the most common, not necessarily the most important.
I said the first and maybe I use the word most important, but
okay.
The first thing on the list would be a better way to put it, right?
Okay.
Because my logic is if you can't afford to retire, and including all those things, making all the cutbacks, moving, changing, so on and so forth, if you can't afford to retire, the decision is made for you. You must work longer.
I think that's right. But here's what I would say is I think it's useful though for us to explore this question also from the vantage point of even though this isn't, I'm not sure how many listeners are tuned into this who are not either prepared or on their way to being prepared. So in terms of where our listeners stand, I'm assuming that most of our listeners are thinking about a variety of other considerations. There's probably a high degree of financial preparation, and now they're at a point where they can think about start thinking about this in not purely financial terms.
Well, agreed. Once if you've solved the financial issue, and actually let's go on because that sounds kind of like where you're headed towards anyway. Let's say you've solved the financial issue. So now you can afford financially to retire. What is a reason or that you would keep working?
Yeah,
All right.
Roshan, that's I think one of the areas I looked up and I think is interesting is working not only benefits you, but it benefits other people. And I think that's sometimes a big motivator why people want to continue on working, whether they're part of a team-based environment at work and they're on a project and their weight, what they carried or their task just benefits the whole team and it helps out everybody and generates revenue for the company. That's a motivating factor, being able to help out your coworkers, or whether you're a doctor, lawyer, or a financial advisor, your clientele, just being able to have an impact on people's lives and being able to help them with problems and issues as part of your work is, I think it's a really motivating factor for people just to continue working in their late ages. And very important sometimes, and that can be really hard when you transition in retirement to use those skill sets that you had in work and apply those outside of the work environment to help other people, where you probably have to do a lot more searching to have that same impact on people. I think is a non-financial way to kind of motivate you to stay in work.
Yeah, I hear you there. I did have that as well. I had you love your work as one of the things on my list. I don't know that they're necessarily the same thing as you described in terms of benefiting others, but that if your work is a passion of yours and you really enjoy it, I can see that being a reason to keep working. When you first say sort of doing it for the team and the good of the company. That part I do sort of question to a certain degree because I'd want to go deeper on your motivations. If you said to me, well, I'm going to keep working because it benefits the team and the company, I would probably challenge that with, well, is that what benefits you, right? Is that the best thing for you to do?
Yeah, and you do over time also develop strong relationships where it's hard to make that decision. All right, I'm going to leave, or I'm going to take that next step to retire. And that's where it's the really motivating factor with those, maybe those relationships that you build up that could sometimes really keep you in those working years to just continue on. But yeah, work is definitely a motivating factor when it comes to some of the relationships that you have built up over time, whether it's with clients, whether it's team members, or whoever it may be.
Yeah, I have that on the list too. I flipped it the other way though. I put a lack of social relationships outside of work.
Yes.
And the reason I put it that way, and a lot of people have this, their only social interaction with people are at the office, but it's not, usually that's a coworker and not a friend relationship. And if that is the case, you're not staying there because you may be staying there because you value those relationships so much, but I think you're also staying there because you don't have relationships outside of work. So there are a couple things we touched on. Eric, I'd love your thoughts on it. First is keep working because you either love to work or it benefits the team. And second, your social interactions. Were either of those on your list of reasons to keep working?
Well, the first one certainly is, which is loving your work, and then related to that, feeling an obligation to stay with it because of the organization you care about. So a friend of mine was, until he recently retired, the CEO of this one organization. And over that, I think it was 30-year period, he developed that from something that was sort of a small and struggling organization, but certainly with a great mission. And over the course of those 30 years, put it on an exceptionally strong financial foundation, and its scope had greatly developed. And it's an organization that's, while it's a technically a not-for-profit, it's now it's a very financially strong not-for-profit that's doing a lot of good, serving, as it happens, an older population. And he had contemplated when he would call it quits, and really wanted to be, because he felt such a stewardship of this organization and what it had accomplished and what it could yet accomplish. He wanted to be absolutely certain that the next generation of leadership, the successors in that role, would be well equipped and wouldn't feel as though they had been left kind of high and dry with an early departure on his part. And so what he did is he structured a 5-year phase out, or a 5-year transition period, where gradually, his role diminished and more of those responsibilities transitioned over to his successor. And I think he was, in the final analysis, very happy with having gone about it in that way, even though there was no financial need for him to do so, and even though he would have very much enjoyed the opportunity to instead be out traveling more than he was because of his staying there. But I think that's an example of that deep motivation to make sure that the work and this organization you've built doesn't disintegrate by virtue of your leaving prematurely.
Yeah, and that's where it sounds like in that story, he's just so deeply vested and it's so important to him, the success of the organization, that even if he wanted to traveling was less important than making sure the organization was set up well for when he left.
And it was driven even more than by just the organization. It was this sense of stewardship to all the people that were being served by this, and not leaving them in a position with, the weakness of a weakened organization means jeopardy or some heightened risk to the people who the organization serves, and that was just not an acceptable outcome for him, which I really admire.
Yeah, I do also. That is great. What did his organization do?
A variety of housing for seniors who are no longer able to take care of themselves.
So his was really an organization that was about giving back to others. So it's not only the organization, he wanted to make sure he helped those seniors still. That's wonderful. Let's flip to the other side. You are now financially ready to retire. what are some reasons to leave right now? If you're deciding you're financially ready and you're saying, should I retire now or should I keep working? What are some reasons to retire now? Eric, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Well, I would say again, the thing that probably comes is the thing that comes to mind most for me is the ability to do things that you couldn't do well or as well while you were working. So I'll use an example of my wife, whom I mentioned has recently retired. And in her case, the strong motivation for her was she wanted to be able to invest a lot more of her time in her mom, who lives a couple thousand miles away. So in this case, now she's in a position to travel out there and stay with her at length and help her through things. And then when she's back home, even remotely, she can be helping her much, much more readily than she'd previously been able to do. Also, with grandchildren here, it's time. This gives her more time to on a moment's notice to go spend time with the grandkids, which is really great. But I would say for some of my friends, the guys in particular, have some loves that they just have not really been able to as fully pursue. And some of those I've mentioned before are in prison ministry, and in other cases it's, hey, how do I volunteer in some capacity? Or, so a lot of those, it's the volunteering part. It's the really getting out there and mentoring people in ways that it's not easily possible to do at work, that retiring earlier rather than later permits them to do.
Yeah. So, and you had called that category doing things you don't have time to do, or fully do while you're working.
As
correct?
Fully, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great one. Adrian, thoughts on this, or one of your reasons to retire?
Very
sooner?
relatable what you brought up, Eric. I know somebody close to me that wants to take time off of work, maybe fully retire because they want to really get their business going. I think that's a very common thing. Time where you didn't really have, or it was really hard to manage both, now is an opportunity to really push yourself to take on new ventures. I think is a great point, and it brings up a lot more flexibility. You have more time to really grab your retirement by the hands and see all the stuff that you were planning when you're working, if it's really working out. And if it's not, you have even more time to find new passions, to apply your skills, maybe even find new income streams or income sources that you might not have been able to achieve if you worked longer and then you retired later and you didn't really have the flexibility built in. Also, maybe when it comes to new alternatives, when it comes to spending or negotiating prices, whatever it may be, you'd have a little bit more time on your hands when you take that early retirement step to really take chances or make mistakes, or just really see how you want your retirement to go.
A great one. Definitely taking control of what you want. I actually had, Adrian, you mentioned the business. I have one that I think it's the same thing you guys have. I'm just going to read how I had it. I called it "Pursue Your Dreams, Passions, and Finding Yourself." Right. So that, I think, encompasses the business, and Eric doing things that you didn't have time for during work. I've got one that I don't think you can argue against, but I'd love to see if you have counter thoughts.
Sure.
But to me, the obvious reason is you're either unhappy at your work or hate your work. Right. If you're financially ready and you don't like what you're doing, why continue doing it?
Yeah, I have a client who I would say fits that pretty closely, who it's a very stressful position because the company isn't the most financially sound of all the companies out there. It's in a very competitive environment, let's put it that way. And as a result, it has had to make some cutbacks. When you have cutbacks in your company, there's always that looming question, will there be another cutback, and will I be part of that? No one likes to have that choice taken away from them. In some ways, it just starts raising the question, this is a high stress position, which it feels uncertain. Is this a healthy way to live? And so in this particular client's case, his His mindset is as soon as I am in a position to take 18 months of Cobra to get me to Medicare age, so at 63 and a half, I'm out. And that I'll finesse that a little bit to coincide with the awarding of bonuses. And so, once I've landed the bonus, then I'm out. But I can't. I mean, we all have jobs that have stress, but I would say some jobs have more stress than others that you can't control as easily. And I think if you're in a situation like that, you might want to say, even if it's not to retire, it might be to look for possibly a career change, or at least a company change, something along those lines.
Yeah, I completely agree. You actually brought up another one. I didn't mention it because we sort of moved on from financial, but healthcare, like you mentioned him staying for Cobra. I think, and I'm going to give us another sort of larger category, but health can be a reason to retire sooner or keep working, right? I think you were getting at that at the beginning,
right,
where you were saying if you have a shorter life expectancy, that might be an argument to retire sooner. And so I think the both sides of the healthcare, one side to keep working is the insurance. Like, will you be able to get coverage until Medicare kicks in via Cobra or getting something on your own? Or is there any reason you couldn't get coverage? So that might be a reason to keep working. But on the flip side, not only longevity, but also just where you are physically, right? So maybe you do have a longer life expectancy, and your life expectancy isn't impacted. However, you have actually, I know someone like this personally, have trouble, has a bad knee, can't walk for distances, right? So when you think about being retired and taking these long trips where you're going from one place to the other, or you're going to art galleries, things like that, if your physical state is deteriorating to the point where you won't be able to do what you want. The person I said, I know someone like this. Well, she can't travel at all anymore because of her leg issues. Both legs just get a lot of pain.
Right. That's really true. I have a client. It's a very painful story, actually. The fellow's lineage has some health challenges in it, and so and now he is, over the last 5 years, way earlier than anyone would expect, has started to manifest some of these same patterns of decline, and is concerned that if it's progressive in the way that it was for one of his parents, that he may not have that much time really to enjoy, at least while he's, where he's got all his capacities, he may not be in a position to enjoy his family and his wife, whom he loves, and kids and grandkids and travel and physical. He's a very physically fit fellow. And so at this point, even in his particular case, pulling the trigger this early wouldn't be good financially. But the recognition of kind of the opposite side of the coin in his case is just such a deterrent to continue, that he's really asking the question, would this be workable? And the kids, it's interesting, in this family, a very tight-knit family, have said, you know what, we recognize this too, and we would be more than happy to contribute to your maintenance during your retirement years if necessary, if that would permit you to have this chapter of not just working because you must, but being able to spend time with. And there's a conflict also. I wouldn't say conflict. I would say since it's a circumstance of uncertainty, there's no saying that it with absolute certainty that this path is going to be the same as this man's, one of his parents. Then his wife is also asking the question, but does it really make sense? Because then she recognizes, or at least there's a high likelihood that she'll be around for a lot of years, and the decisions that they make now will have financial ramifications for her for a much longer time, potentially. So
Eric, the husband in this couple has the physical issues. the children sound incredible. They're saying we'll help out as needed, but the wife in this case has no physical issues. It sounds like she probably has a long life expectancy as well. And so her concern is, well, essentially, the husband with physical issues may pass away, and then she may not have enough for her life.
Correct.
So have you worked through some scenarios and options with them as of yet? I'm just curious as to some of the things you came up with.
Yeah, I have. And while it's not complete, my sort of tentative recommendation has been to say, well, if you decide to pull the trigger and leave early, which I certainly could understand you're doing, I'll help you figure out a path for making that happen. But it might be making some significant adjustments. It might even be moving in with one of your kids. On the other hand, if you're not 100% sure that that's the route that you want to go, what I'd rather have you do is to talk with your employer and see if there's a way of restructuring your role in such a way that you can have some of that high quality family time and some of that travel time by working less, not by ceasing work altogether.
Is getting another job an option as well, or is, just
it
looking?
might be. It might be relocating to a much lower a place where the cost of living is a lot lower would also help, but then that unfortunately takes them much further away from their children and grandchildren. So it's a little bit of a trick how they would make it all work ideally.
Yeah, it's a complicated one. With just looking at what we've discussed today in this specific case, the reason to retire sooner is health. The reason that they sort of can't is also health, but the wife's health, the fact that she's in great shape and might live longer.
Right.
And then in addition to that, financial concerns, right? How do you figure it out or find a solution? That's an interesting one. I'm going to get us back onto our reasons to retire sooner. And I'm going to give you one that I've got the counter on why to work longer.
Yeah.
But I have that you have something to retire to. And what I mean by that is you have something you want to do when you retire, so that you may want to leave your work sooner, assuming financials are okay, to get focused on that. What kind of lines up with what you said earlier, both Eric, you had said this, and Adrian, about doing things you didn't have time for, or pursuing the dreams and finding yourself. But the reason I think this one's important as opposed to the counter of reason to work longer is just because you don't know what you're going to do with yourself or nothing to retire to, is because I think it underscores the importance of looking for that other thing after your work ends, looking for that sooner than later.
Yeah, that's interesting, Roshan. That's also something I came across. It's pretty popular. You don't want to retire from something. You want to retire to something. And it's kind of a mixed bag where people criticize this, saying you really shouldn't retire to something or pick stuff out because you want to leave it open-ended. If you set like hard objectives or really try to obtain it, you'll see it as a failure, and you don't want to see anything as a failure in your retirement. It's your retirement. You should enjoy it. You deserve it. That's kind of like the argument they have against it. I thought that was interesting, but I also like your point how you should have plans. You should have stuff look forward to. But I also want to say, like, it's okay maybe if it doesn't happen in the right time frame, but just setting objectives and goals and having stuff looking forward to is always great, and it's always really important. And I think also we touched on it a little bit, but I guess everyone really wants to kind of retire on top of their game. They want to be as financially as fit as possible. They want to be in the best physical and mental health as they can, so they can enjoy their retirement, do all the things they want. And that's where it's really important, timing your retirement, trying to find the best transition strategy you possibly can, where you don't want to overwork yourself and not really enjoy your retirement or have the time frame you want, or you don't want to work too little and don't build up enough liquidity and meet your financial goals, where it's kind of trying to find that perfect spot in the middle, I think is some interesting points we kind of discussed.
Yes, it's so much in there, Adrian, that you just touched on. My first reaction is I'd love to debate the people that are against having something to retire to, because I just can't. My belief is, and if what you described as their perspective of you don't want to have too much, or you don't want to put sort of pressure on yourself
pressure,
to quote
yes.
unquote fail in retirement, I can kind of see that, right? But the people, I go back to the stats on people that are unhappy in retirement, and the two biggest reasons, and that stat, I believe it was the employee benefits resource or something like that. They have a stat every year. They talk about, are retirees satisfied or are not satisfied with their retirement, and more than half are not satisfied. And the two biggest reasons that they say are, one, lack of human interaction, and two is they don't have anything to accomplish. And people sometimes hear the word accomplish and they think it's things like you've got to have some world-changing accomplishment. It can be as little as, I want to go to the gym 2 or 3 times a week, right? It doesn't have to be anything huge. But the reason I'd say I'd love to debate the people that think having something to retire to can be a bad thing is I need to understand their perspective more, because I totally think they're wrong on this one. So I'd want to hear what they had to say. The other thing that you mentioned that stood out as well, though, was people retiring on top of their game, and I think it's a great point. I think that varies by individual. And Eric, I want to give you a shot to see what your thoughts are, or anything to add, or what you think on what Adrian said. I just feel like there was so much good information there.
Yeah, well, I guess as I was thinking about it, Adrian, I was thinking about what about some of the people who maybe are at the top of their game, but their game is a really high demand job physically, and so I'm thinking about some of the folks that work in either where they're in labor in some fashion or another, or in policing, or in firefighting, or in some of these things where you have to be in great shape, and you don't necessarily have the luxury of just saying, well, I'm going to keep working until I'm 70. Well, you may not be in a position to do that. And so what sorts of transitions there? I think you probably have to think, as you've pointed out, is to think about what you want to retire to a lot earlier. Also, I'm thinking about some of our younger listeners, and just want to highlight one thing that is for on the financial side as well. When in the 1930s, somebody who would retire might have a life expectancy that was the median life expectancy, at least was maybe late 70s, something like that. So you might have upon retirement 10, 15 years, something along those lines. Whereas today, it's quite common for people to have a 25 or 30 year expectation of living beyond age 65. So the ratio of work to years after work was one thing in 1930, and now it's completely changed, where there's so many more years after 65 that just to bring the ratio back into alignment somewhat means just on that level alone, because of our extended life expectancy, thinking in terms of you're 40 or you're 45, if you can start thinking now in terms of working longer, and not have this sort of default assumption about this societally specified age of 60 or 62 or 65 or something like that. If you can start thinking that way now earlier, I think you will take, it won't seem like you're denying yourself if you wind up living longer. I should say working longer, to support the likelihood of living longer.
Yeah, and Eric, I love this. I'm going to give one stat that I love, and I'm hoping I can remember it correctly. So I'll say a story, not a stat.
Sure.
But you mentioned life expectancy in 31, and I just love sharing this. The reason age 65 was selected is because in Germany in 1889 they decided to provide like essentially Social Security if you were over 65. When they did this, the average life expectancy was 37.7 years for men and 41.4 years for women. So when they set this up, they stacked the deck, the German government did that they're unlikely to pay anything. All right. And I bring this up now for a brief history, but also to say, don't let your age be selected by Germany in 1889.
Right.
Right. Select the age that is right for you. And I just thought your mentioning of life expectancy and that story flows so well with our topic for today.
Can I say one more thing about life expectancy, just to heighten it?
Please.
So if I'm not mistaken, in the United States, life expectancy at birth, which is different than life expectancy at age 65, but life expectancy at birth in 1900 in this country, I believe, was age 47. Life expectancy at birth in 2000, so merely 100 years later, was, if I recall correctly, 77. So life expectancy at birth is, of course, profoundly influenced by child mortality rates. So we want to acknowledge that. But nevertheless, in the entire history of civilization, to see life expectancies rise by 30 years, life expectancy at birth to rise by 30 years in 1 century is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so has our thinking kept pace with that shift in the fundamental demographic reality of how long we live? I think the answer is not well.
Well, good point on that. And actually, while I was just at a seminar that I'm attending, a workshop, and I don't know where their stats from, but they said if you're 69 today, you will on average live till age 85. So haven't fact checked them, so I don't want to cite any kind of source, but that's an interesting point there, talking about, you meant years ago or even a generation ago, where you would retire and pass away in a couple of years. Now, if you retire and you use that age of 65, you've probably got another 20 years at a minimum, which is another argument I would give to people who say don't have something to retire to, because it's not a short time frame now. Now you're talking about 20 years where you could easily have another a career if you wanted to, or you could sit around and do nothing. Either one is okay if you actively choose that. That's my argument to having something to retire to. Don't have your retirement chosen for you. And there are a lot of people whose retirement ends up being like time in front of the TV, but it's just because they don't have another alternative, not because that's what they want. Gentlemen, do either of you have anything to add for reasons to either work longer or retire sooner?
Those were all the ones I found, but I definitely enjoyed all the ideas and our discussion today. It was really solid. How about you, Eric?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Well, I think we gave our listeners a lot to think about. For those of you that are actively making this decision, I hope this was helpful. You can always reach out to us at any time. We're happy to answer questions, help you further. And for those of you that have a little while to go, I hope we've at least given you some things to think about in preparation for when it's time to retire. Now I want to shift us over to our the segment of our show called High Impact Life. We always end our show trying to give you something positive with either the science of happiness or high impact life. And Eric's got a very interesting organization to share with us today.
Right. So the High Impact Life segment is to think about ways that we can invest or volunteer or mentor or shop or whatever sorts of things that we can do so that we'll have more joy and we'll also do good for people. And there's an organization that I ran across a few years back that I think is really an interesting example of ways in which a number of people have pooled their skills, really advanced professional skills, to do something good together. And I use this not necessarily strictly as a possible area of focus for people's support or encouragement, although I certainly think if you have an interest to support and encourage this particular group, fantastic. But I also think it's useful to think about it as an example of people in a specific professional discipline who've come together and are using deploying their skills in a very specific way. The organization is called 100-fold. And so 100 is 100, 100-fold. And this is a group of architects who have said, in many parts of the developing world, there are a lot of whether it's education or it's social welfare or other sorts of things, where there's some buildings that are needed, or organizations need buildings to support what they're accomplishing among these populations. But a lot of times the pressure to deliver a building at the lowest possible price means that a certain level of beauty is sacrificed, or design, something that's a design element that would make it maybe not only more beautiful, but also more functional in some ways. And so what they've done is to say, let's solve that problem. Let's see if we can still deliver these buildings for these organizations at a very reasonable price, but provide some design advantages as well that will make this space inviting and effective and beautiful. So if you have an interest, especially if you have an interest in architecture or an interest in design, I encourage you to go look at their website, which is www.100foldstudio.org. And you'll see some of the examples of the projects that they've done and where they're working around the world. And consider that as especially if you have a design background, you might want to connect with them and see if you could be part of doing what they're doing. Now, this isn't only for people who are at that point that coincides with what we've discussed in this entire podcast, where you're ready to retire and maybe this is the next thing that you do. In fact, there are the vast majority of the architects that are working with 100-fold are young people. And so they have room for internships as well. So if you have a son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter, maybe we even have some younger people that are listening to this podcast, but someone who is in architecture or civil engineering or one of these related disciplines and is looking for an internship, this might be an internship opportunity for them as well.
Sounds like a really good way to give back. And I'm just going to read the a web address again. It's 100foldstudio.org.
Mm-hmm.
And Eric, as you mentioned, I looked at their projects. They are all over the world, and they look like a great organization.
Mm-hmm.
For all of our listeners, I want to say thank you again for joining us today. Please like, subscribe, tell your friends about us, and please contact us if there are questions you have about what we've discussed, or questions you'd like us to answer, or if you just need help. We're always available. All our contact information is in the description, the show notes. And this has been another episode of the Retirement Lifestyle Show. Thank you very much.